I want to start by putting this in perspective. In terms of the loss of human life, you say that climate change will be many times or could be many times more deadly than the COVID-19 pandemic. Make that connection for us. How much worse could it be?
Yeah, so the deaths will just go up over time as you get more heat waves, forest fires, and most importantly, the inability to go outdoors and do farming anywhere near the equator. And so it'll get worse and worse. The temperature rise is based on the total cumulative amount of CO2 we put in the atmosphere. And so certainly by the end of the century, you'll have permanent die-offs of all these coral ecosystems. No beach you ever went to will be around. And sadly, there won't be a simple solution like, hey, let's get a vaccine and we can get ourselves out of this thing, because it's the entire industrial economy that's responsible for these emissions.
Now, you say we have no choice but to get to zero from 51 billion tons a year. And I know you're optimistic. You say it'll be hard, but I want to hear from Bill Gates, the realist. Like, how likely is it that we get to zero? Is there a percentage you can give me?
Well, unless the younger generation adopts this as the moral cause that's important to them beyond their individual success, and they're very loud about that in all the rich countries and across multiple political parties, unless we have that's always putting it first on the agenda, then I don't think we'll meet 2050. But I do see signs that that's coming into place. I mean, what cause could be more important than preserving livability of the earth and these natural ecosystems? So my role was simply to say, yes, this goal is a good one, although very, very hard, and then talk about how we accelerate the innovation and make people realize that because we're trying to get to zero, it's every sector of emission. And there's been a tendency to focus on two of the five, electricity and transport, but kind of ignore agriculture and buildings and then manufacturing, including cement and steel. So it's hopefully a dose of realism for anyone who thought it was easy, but also a roadmap to help people who think it's impossible to see that it is possible.
Now, you mentioned 2050 there. We hear a lot of dates. John Kerry said we have 9 years left. The UN said we have 10 years left back in 1989. And I wonder, what is the actual goalpost? And are these dates a distraction?
Well, 2050 is probably the soonest that we could get emissions near to zero. And so that's where that date comes from. The more you force up the temperature, the more you get sea level rise and the more you get left. We don't know some magic number where it's dramatically worse. It's bad the more it warms up. And for subsistence farmers, they're already seeing it. We see events in the US, including, weirdly, because they call it warming, the ability of cold fronts to come in and cause disaster. All of the extreme things get more likely. And, I think that's creating an awareness. But, I wish we could get it done before 2050. That's there's just too much to replace. The next 10 years, we have to do a lot of invention because when you're talking about all sorts of steel and cement factories, scaling up deployment globally will take those next 20 years.
So let's talk about the inventions. You've been looking for solutions that have unbelievable scale and reliability, funding some of those through Gates Ventures over the last 13 years. Where should investors be placing their bets right now?
Well, this is going to change a lot of industries. The car industry, and you've got people like GM saying after 2035, they won't make gasoline cars. All these manufacturing businesses will have to change their processes. I put about $2 billion in to a variety of things, and I'm both directly and indirectly through Breakthrough Energy Ventures that I created, trying to make sure there's high risk capital for every area of emission. In fact, backing a number of companies in each area because the failure rate will be fairly high. But there's promising work. We talk about the green premium, which is the extra cost to buy, say, a ton of green cement versus the normal cement, those green premiums are very, very high. And I propose in the book that the size of those metrics and bringing those down to be very, very small, that's actually the best indication. Will the world be able to achieve this very ambitious goal, even more than the near-term reductions, because you can make near-term reductions and not solve the hard parts. And we need all the parts.
Now, so much of the problem involves big things, as you point out, like steel and cement and fertilizer. And I wonder, how much do individuals and individual decisions really matter? Like, if I stop eating burgers, which you point out are a big carbon culprit, will that really make a difference?
Well, yes, your carbon footprint will go down dramatically if you don't eat meat. But one way to do that is to be a customer some portion of the time of these new ways of making ground beef that people like Beyond and Impossible and others are bringing out. Because as demand for those goes up, they scale up their factories, they improve the quality, they get the price to come down. So whether it's an electric car or artificial burger, that demand is catalytic, because we're trying to recreate what we saw with solar panels and lithium-ion batteries, where the volume actually brought the cost down. And, for the passenger car, within 10 to 15 years, all these improvements will mean the green premium, the extra, what you give up with an electric car where you might need a tax credit, that'll go all the way to zero. And the market, as you saw with GM's plans, will be green without the government having to impose regulations or tax credits. But those things are so key to help us get.
Now, we know you love burgers, and I'm just curious, like, what do you do when you get a craving? How often can you just not resist and you just eat a good old-fashioned burger?
Well, about 50% of the time when I have a burger, it's one that's made with these Impossible Foods or Beyond Meat ground beef. And those have essentially no greenhouse gas emissions. As they improve their products, and they're quite good, I really highly recommend that people try those. I'll get to the point where I'm 100% buying just those burgers. I'm also spending money on direct air capture and lots of things to completely offset my carbon footprint, which, it's very high because of the way I travel, and, I have more than one house. So, I'm in a sense one of the most guilty, but I'm pioneering offset approaches that are really honest, and that as those get purchased, they'll also come down in price.
So you're planning to give meat up 100%?
The cow-based meat, now, some people are trying to change the cow's diet or capture the methane. So, I don't want to count the cow out. There's a lot of ingenuity there. But right now, these protein-based approaches have surprised me how far they've come. And when they've been offered in burger chains, the demand has been quite good.
Now, some of the critics have said you don't focus on the political obstacles enough when it comes to climate change. You're solely focusing on the technology here. If there's one thing that the Biden administration could do to help solve this problem faster that would really make a difference, what would that one thing be?
Well, the long lead time item to drive innovation is R&D funded by the government. And in the health space, the US has done a brilliant job with the National Institute of Health that's driven breakthroughs and, creates private companies that take that and offer products to the US and to the world. The energy R&D budget is way too small, well below the health level. So that's got to go up dramatically. Some of the tax credits to help the new product categories like green steel and cement or energy storage, we need to apply that tactic there. And then the government's a big purchaser, and they can buy more of these green products. And so we really need to get going and push the innovation and push the demand side for those innovations as well.
Now, we just saw a major shock to the electric grid in Texas, a lot of deaths. you mentioned that energy plants there should have been weatherized. And I'm curious, where do you think we should be making investments right now before this happens again?
Well, there's two things the Texas event shows and one thing it doesn't. It doesn't show that renewables were the problem in that case because there were shutdowns because of lack of weatherization in natural gas and even tripping one reactor to go off. But the two things it does show is that we're going to have more extreme events, so we need to be ready for that. And we need to invest in resilience. It is fair to say that if you don't build transmission and storage and some nuclear, which is not weather dependent, that you are going to have a lack of reliability when there's tough weather. And, you know, the politics of permitting transmission lines, you know, we need to come up with a way to make that more attractive. So, you know, there's a legitimate issue of reliability, although it wasn't the problem in this case.
Now, your fellow tech titans like Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, they're all tackling different elements of the climate crisis. And I'm wondering if you should all join forces like the Climate Avengers or something to really take this on.
Well, Elon, you know, Tesla pioneered the electric car market, which is great. His carbon challenge for direct air capture will be good. Jeff Bezos has made a gigantic commitment with his climate fund. And actually, I am talking to him. We will end up doing some things in partnership, and at least we'll understand what the other one is up to. So I agree, as we get more people engaged, you know, figuring out, okay, what is the path for innovation, both supplying and demanding innovation, we should brainstorm more, although, you know, our individual ideas are part of the strength of, you know, crazy entrepreneurs working on this problem.
How might we see you partnering with Jeff Bezos?
Well, he's funded a lot of the key climate organizations. You know, we're talking about, and he's part of Breakthrough Energy Ventures. The idea of how you create a demand side for these green products, even in the early stage where their green premium will be high, that's an area where, you know, we need something. I've realized of all the missing pieces, and we talk about that as being catalytic in nature. We want to bring companies and governments in on that, but having a strong base of philanthropic capital to get it started would be fantastic.
And yet, you know, Jeff Bezos obviously has made that $10 billion commitment, but these Amazon cardboard boxes, the blue and white envelopes, I hear even worse, the trucks for delivery. I mean, shouldn't a company as innovative as Amazon be able to figure that out?
Well, you can't put every societal problem on Amazon. They are part of the physical economy delivering goods. So of course their scope 3 emissions are large. You know, so there's Amazon as a company that's committed to electric delivery vehicles and funding innovation. And then there's Jeff as an individual, where that 10 billion is even more than I've spent. I've spent a few billion, and I'll spend a few billion more in the years ahead. So, you know, in both cases, I think you'll see thoughtful ways of spending the money. But this requires, you know, all of society to get engaged. It's not, you know, just one intervention or one, you know, company that can fix this.